Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Laura Burges, who's here to share with us her new book, The Zen Way of Recovery, An Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. So are you looking for Buddhist principles and practices that can help support recovery from addiction and addictive behaviors? Well, today's show is going to cover just that. So Laura Burges is a Buddhist teacher in the Soto Zen tradition. She lectures, offers classes, and leads retreats at the San Francisco Zen Center and other practice places in Northern California. She is a teacher at Lenox House Meditation Group in Oakland and has taught for over 35 years. So let's welcome to the show, Laura Burges.
Thank you for having me, Marianne. I'm really pleased to be here with you.
My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Well, I came to Zen Buddhism many years ago, partly because I had really hit a wall with alcohol. And I had a little glimmer of hope that maybe there was another way to live. I was living in Alaska at the time, and I went into a very dark place with alcohol where, it had been fun for a while. And then it became unpredictable when I drank. I just didn't know what was going to happen when I drank. And like a lot of women, I drank by myself when that happened. I just couldn't trust myself to be in public. But I did have this moment of clarity that maybe I could change my life. And I came back to San Francisco and I started looking for a spiritual way of life. And I found that at the San Francisco Zen Center. I stopped drinking abruptly and I plunged into Zen practice. And within a very short time, I was living at Tassajara Zen Mountain Center. And this was a rigorous monastic program. We would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go to the meditation hall. We'd have study hall. We'd have breakfast in the Zendo, the meditation hall. And I really loved the clarity of practice. And also I appreciated the clarity of not drinking. But like a lot of people who stopped drinking, I started feeling like maybe it's okay for me to try again. At that point, I had been practicing Buddhism for 5 years, and I thought, I think I've proven that I don't have a problem with alcohol. I've been without it for 5 years. And so alcohol started creeping back into my life. At this point, I was part of a Zen Buddhist community, and it wasn't acceptable for me to drink the way I drank. I know now that I was an alcoholic and am an alcoholic. So I kept trying to stop, and that went on for another 5 years. And finally, I tell this story in my book. I was sitting in a classroom at San Francisco State. I'd gone back to school to get my teaching credential, and I had another moment of clarity. I had gotten very drunk the night before, and I was very sick, shaking, sick. A lot of us who drink alcoholically have little rules for ourselves. So I never missed a day of work or school because of my drinking. That's what alcoholics do. But I had this moment of clarity that I needed help. And I've heard other people in recovery say this. Something inside of me cried out, please, please help me. And I got up out of that classroom. Marianne, they used to have these things called phone booths. And I went into a phone booth and I opened the phone book, and there was recovery meetings at my fingertips. And I went to a meeting, and I bought 2 beers on the way home from that meeting and drank them and cried and said goodbye to alcohol. And the next day I went to another recovery meeting, and I have not had a drink since September 28th, 1985. So when in 2020, when I received authorization to teach Buddhism through my teacher, Linda Cutts, a teacher at San Francisco Zen Center, Linda lives at Green Gulch Farm, and asked me to be the head student there. The first thing I wanted to do once I was able to teach was to offer recovery meetings to people who were interested in Buddhism. And I always make it clear that for me, recovery comes first. And if I'm very stable in my recovery program, then I'm free to practice Buddhism wholeheartedly. And so for 20 years, I've been offering these retreats and lectures. And it occurred to me that I could offer some of these teachings to other people. And I'd given many, many lectures on Buddhism and recovery. And that's the basis of this book, these Dharma talks that I've given over the years.
Are there times when we really need to kind of question our beliefs when it comes to living in the world, and either, that kind of line where you're at, where we're questioning whether or not we have a problem with alcohol, just to really kind of see what it is that we're really dealing with?
Absolutely. And, in Zen, we have a saying, not knowing is best. And what that indicates is that we want to have an open, flexible mind that's open to possibilities. And if we're trapped in the vicious cycle of addiction, we tend to lie to ourselves. I had all these little voices in my head that said, I'm not that bad. A lot of people drink more than I do, and they didn't have to come into recovery. And what's really been delightful for me is to see these twin paths of Buddhism and recovery blooming in my own life and recognizing the congruence between them. Because, of course, Zen Buddhism is about seeing things clearly. Suzuki Roshi, who founded the San Francisco Zen Center, he would talk about things as it is. Somebody asked him, don't you mean things as they are? And he said, no, I mean things as it is. I think what he was pointing to was the multiplicity of our experience and the kind of oneness of our experience at the same time, and our oneness with one another. And one of the wonderful things for me is that in recovery, we find a community of recovering people that we can rely on. And in Buddhism, we have a Sangha, which is a group of people who want to practice together and live the truths of Buddhism. So both of these paths point to truth and self-knowledge. And so I feel like it's very healthy to always be questioning. And even in Buddhism, we foster questioning the teachings. The Buddha said towards the end of his life, don't take this from me, try your own experience and see where it leads you. He said, you must be a lamp unto yourself. And so when I had that moment of clarity that I had been practicing Buddhism for 10 years, but that I needed help, that was being a lamp unto myself and recognizing that I needed to go and be with people that knew how to not drink one day at a time. And that once I could get grounding in that practice, then my Buddhist practice was much more available to me.
For someone that's new to just recovery, how do they start? And what kind of encouragement would you give them when it comes to recovery with Buddhism?
One of the things about, I co-founded a meeting at Zen Center that has brought many people into Zen practice. It's a recovery meeting that happens at Zen Center on Monday nights. And I think a lot of people come to that meeting because they want to find an alternative to some of the, I haven't found it a problem, but some people find the language of recovery to have quite a Christian bent to it. But I always encourage people to keep this open mind and to look for the similarities in recovery rather than the differences. A friend of mine who practices Buddhism said recently that when he stepped into the rooms of recovery, he said to himself, how could this possibly help a person of my caliber? Now we can laugh at that because in order to recover, we need to have great humility and we need to accept the help of other people that might be very different from us. Um, Marianne, I think that as I say, I tried to quit drinking on my own many, many times. And the difference between this time and all the other times was I recognized that I needed help. And in recovery, I asked other people for help. And then when I had my own feet on the ground, I offered help to others. Now, in my book, The Zen Way of Recovery, in the introduction, I quote the Bodhisattva vow. I vow to live and be lived for the benefit of all beings. And I feel like there's no more vivid example of this than in the rooms of recovery, where people help one another in order to help themselves and to, we don't just get sober for ourselves, we get sober to benefit the whole world. Now, I don't suggest we go around calling ourselves bodhisattvas, but I do feel like there's such a vivid opportunity for us in recovery to practice the bodhisattva way, to take that vow to live and be lived for the benefit of all beings. So for anybody coming into recovery, I just suggest to keep an open mind, to recognize that you're there because you need help and accept the help that's offered. And you can help another person just by turning to the person next to you and introducing yourself. And it might be somebody who's sitting in a recovery meeting for the very first time. Very often people say to me, I'll never forget when you said, then I wince a little bit. Oh my goodness, what did I say? And they'll say something that I had told them maybe years ago that was helpful to them. So like a Buddhist Sangha where we help one another practice Buddhism, it's much easier to sit Zazen if you have someone sitting on either side of you. And it's much easier to recover if you have someone sitting on either side of you in these meetings.
You're not alone on the journey. There are people there to help you.
Yes.
What do you think is one of the most important things someone new to recovery should focus on?
I think a really important thing to focus on, and I feel very fortunate that this kind of happened for me intuitively, maybe because I had practiced Buddhism for a long time and I had sat quietly with others following my breath, is to really pay attention to the way we talk to ourselves. In Buddhism, we practice right speech, and it took me quite a while to recognize that right speech isn't just the way we talk to other people, it's the way we talk to ourselves. And if we grew up in our family of origin with alcoholism or mental illness or homophobia or racism, we might have, by swimming around in that water, inherited that very negative way of thinking and speaking. And one of the signposts of addiction is, we're constantly judging ourselves, feeling ashamed, feeling guilty about the things we do when we're in the thrall of our addiction that we might not have done had we been clean and sober. And to notice that, to talk to ourselves kindly, and that little voice in my head at the end of my drinking said, honey, honey, we need help. Let's go get some help. Rather than chastising myself for this thing in my life that I came to understand was a disease that is manifested in both sides of my family. And the other thing people new to recovery can notice, that little voice in their head that wants them to drink again, or wants them to use again, or wants them to gamble again, or to practice sex addiction. It's a little voice that says, oh, come on, you're just having fun. There's nothing wrong with this. A lot of people are worse than you. There's nothing wrong with having a drink with an old friend. So our mindfulness practice in Buddhism can really wake us up to that addictive voice inside of us that's trying to lead us astray. So that is something I really encourage people new to recovery to focus on. Another thing is, I didn't feel I needed to translate the language of recovery into Buddhist ways of talking. I accepted the language of recovery as it is, knowing that it's helped millions of people, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, atheists, agnostics, Christians, all kinds of people have gotten sober in the rooms of recovery without having to, this is another form of humility to me, without having to translate it into a language that's more comfortable for me. You know, some people find the language of recovery, because it's been around for a long time, can be quite patriarchal. But I haven't let that come between me and recovery. And that's been something that's been a real gift for me to, and I think, again, this is a gift of Buddhist practice, to keep an open mind. Oh my goodness, I've been helped by people I never would have met otherwise. You know, I remember someone who had been houseless for quite a while, but had managed to stay sober, talked about the streets of San Francisco as the valley of the shadow of death. This person was a heroin addict who had to get clean and sober. And he said to me, and this touched me so much, he said, as a houseless person, I've had to do things outside that other people have the luxury of doing inside. You know, and I knew when I met this person that could just as easily have been me. Just because I happened to practice Buddhism, I wasn't protected from the disease of alcoholism.
I think if we humble ourselves in many ways, that could be us in many different capacities, whether it's homelessness from one thing or another. But to look at it from that point of view, I really applaud you, because it opens up a new way of being able to view the world.
Marianne, I just think that's so critical right now, especially in our country, where we've come to this place where we're so divisive, and where it seems like for many people, if you disagree with someone, you need to demonize them and dehumanize them. And I think if we could practice the compassion that's available to us in Buddhist practice, and also in true Christianity and the other religious paths of the world, if we practiced compassion and saw ourselves as the other, this would be a very different world. And this is one of the things that, you know, our Bodhisattva vow points to, that we do the things we do not just for ourselves. If I had just gotten sober for myself, that would be a very stagnant little pool of self to dwell in. You know, I did have to tell my deepest secrets to another human being, and sometimes to a room full of strangers, not for myself, but so that they could identify with me and know that this is available to them, this way of life that's paradoxically a way of freedom. You know, I think so many people think of addiction as this wild freedom, but at the end of our addiction, we can see how limited that life is, and how isolating it is. I speak from the path of alcoholism, because that's was my drug of choice. But in any addictive behavior, it's a disease of isolation and shame and secrets. Many of us who have been addicted have lived a double life. You know, we're one person with one group of people and a very different person with others. And I think both Buddhism and recovery give us a way to integrate our being, so that we can be a person of integrity that can look anyone in the eye and feel a part of, instead of apart. You know, to feel one with humanity instead of in this isolated pool of stagnant self.
I often hear of people struggling to combine what they would call like their two selves, because they have this person that they have to personify at work, they have this person at home, and to be able to bring it together sometimes is very difficult for them to do, and especially when you bring in addictions to that, because then that's just another layer.
Well, that's really true. And I share in my book that when I was 18 years old, I was walking across the campus of San Francisco State, where I later returned to have that moment of clarity when I was 35. I was walking across the campus and a social science major approached me with a clipboard and asked me, what is it that you want? And without skipping a beat, I said, equanimity. And I was kind of startled that I said that. I had no idea where that came from. But little did I know that I would have a very adventurous, sometimes dangerous, sometimes confusing, sometimes enlightened way towards the equanimity that I have finally found in Buddhism and recovery. I think one thing that mindfulness practice, that meditation practice gives us is a Buddhist teacher, Tara Brach, calls it the sacred pause. So we can bring our practice into our workplace, and when we have an impulse to lash out at someone we disagree with or to say something that might be hurtful, we can pause and either choose to remain silent, or we can find a way to say what we need to say out of our own integrity in a much kinder and more compassionate way. And I cover some of this way of communicating in my chapter that was very helpful for me. It's a chapter on emotional freedom, where we can learn how to communicate in a much more compassionate and loving way. Many of us grew up in homes where we weren't really modeled how to deal with conflict, or even maybe how to speak in a loving way, or to support one another. And so in my chapter called Kintsugi, The Places We Are Broken, I address this brokenness that many of us have. And I think taking our practice and our recovery with us into the workplace, into our friendships. Many people in recovery talk about going to a family reunion and sort of armoring themselves a little bit, because so many of their habitual ways of thinking and being are triggered in their families of origin. I think working towards a place where we can be an integrated person, it is difficult to be that one person. At the end of his life, Suzuki Roshi said, "Don't worry, I know who I am." And in recovery, I found out who I am, that I'm an alcoholic, that I can't drink like other people. And just by admitting that to myself, a world of freedom and possibility has been opened up to me. Don't worry, I know who I am. And I think there are many wonderful paradoxes in Zen, and there are paradoxes in recovery as well, that by saying no to drugs and alcohol, I wouldn't have been able to write this book if I hadn't been clean and sober. But, Marianne, we spoke about my children's books as well. Buddhist Stories for Kids and Zen for Kids are my two children's books. I got sober the month I went back to school to get my teaching credential. And I couldn't have taught kids if I hadn't stepped on the path of recovery. And, by that time, by the way, I had a beautiful daughter. I couldn't have been the parent I wanted to be had I not said no, finally, to drugs and alcohol. And it's not enough just to say no. We also have to clear up the wreckage of our past, and take a look at our own behavior and clean up our side of the street. I think this is part of the honesty that's available to us, both in Buddhism and recovery.
That's one thing that's very unique with Buddhism, is it gives you the opportunity, and recovery as well, it gives you the opportunity to really look at who you are and take inventory of things, as opposed to just going through life and kind of bumbling around.
That's right. I tell a story in the book that when my brother and I traveled across country with my dad, a wonderful man, Terry Burgess, And we stopped at a amusement park in the Midwest. And my brother and I went on this ride. It was a teacup ride. My dad was a very friendly person, and he was chatting with the guy that ran the ride. So my brother and I were twirling around and around in this teacup. And I didn't understand that you had to hold your arms out and brace yourself on the bar in front of you. I was just being tossed around. I was screaming and crying. My father had his back to me so he couldn't see me. My brother was trying to show me how to brace myself. And, finally the guy realized that I was in trouble and stopped the ride. And I look back on that as a kind of a metaphor, as the way that I was when I was acting out in my addiction. You describe it very well, stumbling around in the world. I was like a leaf in the wind, kind of. I didn't have that stability that has come to me later, where I could pause and turn in the appropriate direction rather than being at the mercy of my own emotions, at the mercy of my addiction, at the mercy of other people's opinion of me, at the mercy of events in the world. I know now that there's absolutely nothing that could happen to me in life that drinking would make better. This is one of the great illusions of addiction, is that we think it's going to help us and make us better able to face adversity. And, we find out it's really just the opposite.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Laura Burges in regards to her new book, The Zen Way of Recovery, An Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Looking for a page-turner? Cozy up to a fantasy adventure romance trilogy with The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper by Mary Kay Savarese. The second novel in the Star Writers trilogy, The Star Writers Club, is coming soon. Take the journey. Connect with Mary at www.maryksavarese.com. Her books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores.
With Breath Hub, you'll experience the transformative power of breath as it harmonizes your body, mind, and spirit. Recommended by experts in fitness, sports, psychology, and medicine. Meet the scientific way of being well. Breath Hub. Breathe better, live better.
Are you a coffee lover who wants to make a difference? Look no further than Fire Department Coffee, a veteran-owned business that gives back to support first responders in need. Each batch of coffee is freshly roasted right here in the USA by a dedicated team of first responders and coffee experts. So when you enjoy a cup of Fire Department coffee, you're not only drinking high-quality coffee, you're supporting members of your community. Start your day with a coffee that gives back. Visit firedepartmentcoffee.com. That's fire, D-E-P-T, coffee.com.
The book Terminal Cancer is a Misdiagnosis, authored by Danny Carroll, is on sale at Amazon now. Licensed psychologist and psychotherapist Tessa Antia-John-Guerra commented, "This is one of the most empowering books on the topic of cancer you will ever read." Award-winning author T.L. Needham commented, "This recommended book can be understood by anyone seeking answers, hope, and alternatives to a terminal diagnosis. Buy it now on Amazon.com.
Pandemonium. Fast forward 20 years. A U.S. president seizes control of all U.S. missiles, the power grid, the banking system, and every computer in America as he hides in an underground bunker. Pandemonium, a captivating sci-fi thriller where a hidden war, psychics, aliens, artificial intelligence, and transcendental love collide with the latest media technology. Pandemonium, live to all devices. Get your copy on paperback or digital. Free sample at getpsychic.org.
Hello, Dr. Cutler here. Do you experience bloating, heartburn, food craving, bowel irregularity, food sensitivities, weight issues? If you do not digest your food, you may be deficient in macronutrients, which your body needs for optimal health. DrEllenCutler.com teaches that this is an enzyme deficiency. I believe the most important supplement is a full spectrum digestive enzyme, Dr. Ellen's Way Digestive Enzymes. Hear more about it at DrEllenCutler.com.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our special guest, Laura Burges, who's here sharing with us her new book, The Zen Way of Recovery, An Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. So in your book, you cover the topic of generosity. I'd love for you to share with our listeners why that's so important and why we need to pay attention to that.
Well, generosity is one of the 6 paramitas, or perfections. And I'll just say what the 6 perfections are. Generosity, and these are so in line with our principles of recovery. I think if we lived these principles completely, we could live our recovery completely as well. So the 6 paramitas, or perfections, are generosity, ethical behavior, patience, wholehearted effort, meditation, and wisdom. But the very first of these is dana in Sanskrit, or generosity. And addiction is such a selfish thing. It's a disease, and we can't help having this disease. But we can step out of the selfishness of addiction when we step onto the path of recovery by opening our hearts to others and by being generous with ourselves as well. You know, looking at the way we talk to ourselves and, as I said before, practicing right speech. Generosity breaks down the painful barriers between us and other people. And, you know, something I say in my book is that we know now from brain science that when we practice generosity, we get a dopamine release in the brain. The exact same dopamine release that is triggered, that we get in our addictive behavior. This is why addiction is so seductive and so compelling. We get that dopamine release in our addiction, but then we have to keep doing that activity or using that substance to get that same relief. You know, it is said that addiction hijacks the pleasure centers of the brain. But if we practice generosity when we're clean and sober, and when we're in out of the compassion that comes to us from Buddhist practice, we get that same dopamine release. Not that that's why we should do it. When we're generous, when we give to a good cause, when we say hello to a stranger, when we open our heart to someone else. You know, I talk in the book about just thanking people. When I walk by a gardener in Golden Gate Park, I say, thank you for taking care of our park. And the look of gratitude on their face is so wonderful. And we have a moment of human connection there. I think if we just kept the word gratitude and and generosity in our own mind throughout the day, the quality of our relationships with other people would be transformed, you know. By the way, these are called the 6 perfections, but, you know, many of us who have addiction problems are also troubled by perfectionism. So we can step back a little bit from that word perfection. But Thich Nhat Hanh, the wonderful Buddhist teacher that we lost in the recent past, he says that the six paramitas are a way to step over from suffering, to step across the stream onto the other side of awakening. And we can do that in a moment. Traffic is such a good metaphor for our self-centered fears. If we could just let someone else into traffic ahead of us because they have their blinker on, rather than feeling like this is some kind of personal affront, we're stepping over from the path of suffering to the path of awakening. And there are many, many moments during the day when we can practice generosity, and then we get to bask in the feeling of gratitude that comes from that. Thich Nhat Hanh says, we can look at our anger, depression, and suffering, breathe deeply, and smile. And we can do that. We don't always recognize that that's a choice we can make. With my third graders, I had a choice of being irritable with them or making a joke out of something and bringing a lightheartedness to it, and recognizing, I taught third grade for 35 years, recognizing those little third graders are luminous beings who have come to be my Buddhist teachers.
I bet they were.
Oh, I learned so much from them, yes.
In your book, you talk about the healing power of forgiveness. And I know that this is such a big topic, especially when it comes to the discussion of recovery. How do these two principles, recovery and forgiveness, work together?
Well, forgiveness is one of my favorite topics because it does have a healing power. I got a lot of my learning about this from Fred Luskin, who's the director of the Forgiveness Project at Stanford University. And, I wrote to Fred and I said, I can't keep holding on to your book, Forgive for Good, because I keep giving it to other people. And he very kindly wrote a beautiful blurb about my book that appears on the inside cover. In recovery, we find it's very important for us to let go of resentment and forgive those who've harmed us. And it's also important for us to approach people we've harmed and ask them for forgiveness. And, I heard this phrase in recovery that if we're going to ask for forgiveness, shouldn't we first be willing to forgive others completely? And if I have the humility to look at some of the damage that I've caused in my life and the harm I've done others just out of unconsciousness and unskillful thinking and being, then I think I can find it in my heart to forgive other people. And because of this, I've collected some wonderful stories of forgiveness where I say to myself, if this person can forgive, shouldn't I be able to forgive? And one of the really important things about forgiveness is that we don't have to. I say this because very often we have been deeply harmed by other people. And we may have been harmed by them in such a toxic and dangerous way that it isn't safe for us to actually be in their presence. In a Buddhist ceremony that I participated in, where I was asked to answer questions from the community, this is called a Shuso ceremony, at the culmination of my teaching training at Green Gulch Farm. I had to answer questions sort of from each person in that community. And it was such an interesting place to be in because I found myself really answering from the heart rather from the intellect. My daughter Nova was in that ceremony, and she asked me the beautiful question, How can I learn to forgive? And I found myself saying to her, we can forgive by not allowing ourselves to be limited or defined by the ways in which we've been hurt. So much of our thinking can revolve around deeply held grudges and resentments. I often quote Pema Chodron on this point, the wonderful American Tibetan Buddhist teacher. She said, holding a grudge is like eating rat poison and expecting the rat to die. So if we allow resentments and grudges to take up space in our mind, rather than choosing to focus on some of the wonderful gifts and interactions that come to us in our lives, we're literally poisoning ourselves. The word to intoxicate means to bring poison in. We can intoxicate ourselves with substances. We can intoxicate ourselves with misinformation that's come to us through the internet. We can intoxicate ourselves with hateful speech that we find swirling around us. But we can also intoxicate ourselves by, Fred talks about, Fred Luskin talks about licking our chops, and enjoying replaying these hurtful things that have happened to us and planning our revenge and thinking about what we could have said in retaliation. And this just keeps us from the sunlight of the spirit. And this is a practice. We have to, you asked earlier about what would I tell someone in recovery. This is someone who's new to recovery to look at this. We say in recovery, resentment is the number one offender. Resentment is the thing that can lead us to pick up a drink again. Pour me a drink is an ancient phrase in recovery. So to notice how often we nurse our resentments. Now, there's a wonderful book called Buddha's Brain, which I recommend in my bibliography. This is by Rick Hansen, and he talks about brain health through the lens of Buddhist practice. And I heard Rick Hansen say, and many other brain researchers, that the brain is like Velcro for negative experiences and like Teflon for positive experiences. As a teacher, 10 people could have thanked me for teaching their children and brought up specific things I'd done that they appreciated. And one parent could criticize me, and that's what I might focus on the rest of the day if I didn't stop myself from doing it. All of this is about our radical dharmic freedom. Our radical dharmic freedom. This is a phrase I learned from Robert Thurman, who teaches religious studies at Columbia University, and parenthetically is Uma Thurman's father. He studied with the Dalai Lama, learned Tibetan as one of the Dalai Lama's first translators. Robert Thurman said that practice isn't just about sitting on the cushion. It's about knowing that when something happens to us, we can either respond instinctually or we can take a moment and turn in the appropriate direction. This is that sacred pause that Tara Brach talks about. This is the pause that's available to us through our recovery, rather than acting instinctually, which we might have done our whole lives. We can pause and we can focus on forgiveness rather than resentment and retaliation. And so forgiveness to me is a key to recovery. Forgiving ourselves first, and recognizing that by sharing our stories with other people, by sharing our addiction story, most importantly, the moment when we turned and went in another direction, the moment when we turned in the appropriate direction of recovery, that we can help all beings. So this is the introduction, and again, it begins with the Bodhisattva vow. I vow to live and be lived for the benefit of all beings. And the very first words of my book, Marianne, are Buddhism did not cure my alcoholism. And this is a very important message I need to share with my readers. Buddhism did not cure my alcoholism. I turned to Zen to change my life, to align myself with the Sangha, the community of Buddhist practitioners, and to find relief from the suffering of addiction. But until I opened my heart to the principles of recovery, I was cut off from the deepest source of my own being. Now I find that Zen Buddhist practice, lived in accord with the solace of recovery, can offer a life that is full of possibilities. It is understandable that those of us who are prone to addiction turn to drugs and alcohol and other distracting behaviors to medicate the distress within. I began drinking when I was a teenager, and alcohol promised to give me things I didn't have: self-confidence, an antidote to my social anxiety, an ecstatic yes to the wide and wild life. Drugs and alcohol may be the closest thing to a spiritual experience that isn't. Over time, addiction pulled me into a downward spiral, taking away all the things it had seemed to promise in the beginning: freedom, expansiveness, peace, relief. Discouraged, but feeling that there might be another way, I stopped drinking, stepped onto the path of practice. At first, Zen helped me turn away from addiction and toward the Sangha and a vital way of life. But ultimately, alcohol began to creep back into my life, and I knew that I needed to address the roots of this disease in a more direct and dynamic way. At the end of my drinking, I thought of all the gifted Buddhist teachers who could sit still for days at a time and shower us with illuminating Dharma talks. But because they were powerless over their own addiction and their own addictive behavior, harmed their students and destroyed or deeply damaged their communities. In this book, I share the teachings that have been helpful to me in my own recovery. But it is not meant to take the place of a program of recovery. If you struggle with addiction, you may experience craving for a substance or an addictive behavior once you start. You might notice that your personality changes when you use or act out. You may be having blackouts, memory lapses as a result of using. You may be frustrated by the fact that you keep using, despite negative consequences. Maybe you have tried to stop and haven't been able to. You may have been discouraged to return to your addiction again and again, despite periods of abstinence. Maybe the people who care about you have tried to tell you about their concerns. Do you lie about your use of substances or food, your sexual behavior, your gambling habit? Do you reveal one side of yourself to one group of people and a very different side to others? Do you lie to family or friends about the addictive behavior of someone you care for? Do you often put your own welfare aside in favor of focusing on someone you love and their struggles with addiction? If any of these signs sound familiar to you, I strongly recommend that you find a recovery program that can directly address your addictive patterns rather than relying solely on Buddhist teachings to keep you sober. There, you can do the work that will help you prepare to fully engage in Zen practice. You can learn much from those who have made the journey through recovery ahead of you, even from people who may seem very different from you. Together, the paths of practice and recovery can provide us with a wonderful strength that has been previously beyond our approach. I'm going to say that again. Together, the paths of practice and recovery can provide us with a wonderful strength that has previously been beyond our reach. The strength of fellowship and of Sangha, the down-to-earth language and tools of recovery, and the wondrous teachings of the Buddha. In our recovery community, our collective intention to stay sober and help others gives us a profound power we never knew we had, including full participation in practice and the life of the Sangha. To be inclusive, I use the word addiction to refer to substances, including alcohol, to self-sabotaging or addictive behavior, such as sex and love addiction, gambling, screen addiction, workaholism, and issues around food, and to the addictive patterns of those you love. For me, the combined practices of Zen and recovery have offered a shining light to lead me out of the darkness of addiction. If you don't have access to a Buddhist Sangha, I hope you will make a place for Zazen, sitting meditation in your life. You can read some simple instructions in the second chapter of this book to help you get started. There's a book list in the back of the book to further your exploration of the intersection of practice and recovery. Learning about Zen, we come upon the word emptiness. This word doesn't tell us that life is meaningless. One aspect of emptiness, from a Zen Buddhist point of view, is that we and all things are empty of a separate self. It is the marvelous realization that none of us exists as a solitary, isolated being. None of us and nothing in this world can exist for 1 nanosecond outside the causes and conditions that give rise to this moment. I am the sun, the stars, the rain, the earth, and the fruits of the earth. I am a vast collection of elements beyond the small self with which I tend to identify. I am my parents, and their parents, and their parents. I am everyone who has taught me and everyone whom I have taught. Every encounter of my life, every moment of my life has contributed to who I am today. Maybe that's enough.
Oh, thank you for reading that for us, Laura. My goodness. And I know so many people will just benefit so much from your book. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Well, thank you for that question. My books, my 3 books that have been published so far are available on the Shambhala website and also on Amazon. There's information about me on the Shambhala website. I also post on Instagram and Facebook. And there are interviews with me that you can find online with David Chadwick, who hosts the Cuke.com website, which is a website that is in honor of our founder, Suzuki Roshi, and his many students that are now scattered all over the world. And Marianne, I want to tell you, right now I'm working on a series of 3 books for Shambhala. Wisdom Stories from India is the first, from Tibet is the very first book. Now I'm working on Wisdom Stories from India, and the 3rd book will be Wisdom Stories from Japan. So I'm still writing and learning myself.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Marianne, I so appreciate this opportunity, and I'd like to say, in the words of the Metta Sutta, the loving kindness meditation, may all beings be happy, may they be joyous, and live in safety. And that's my intention in writing and sharing this book with others. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Zen Way of Recovery, An Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. The Zen Way of Recovery is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. You can also purchase this book directly from the publisher, Shambhala, at shambhala.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best.
Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.